We had foreseen this. The scroll is in safe hands and will be destroyed the minute it is known that harm has come to us.
You have studied our ancient arts, and you know that you cannot harm me. You also know that you must return that scroll to me or die.
The Mummy is a horror film released by Universal Pictures on December 22nd, 1932. Inspired by the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt in 1922, the film was written by John L. Balderston, based on a story written by Nina Wilcox Putnam and Richard Schayer. The film was directed by Karl Freund and stars Boris Karloff, Zita Johann, David Manners, Edward Van Sloan, and Arthur Byron. Since the dawn of time, young children have been losing sleep over the idea of ghouls that haunt the night. And the idea of the bandage-wrapped mummy shuffling towards you with dry, rotten flesh and ancient curses rolling off its tongue has become one of the usual suspects in this nightmare-fueled lineup. While many people in the 21st century will attribute this instinctive fear to seeing the Brendan Fraser mummy movies, or perhaps just from seeing their ghoulish visage in a Fun Facts About Egypt picture book in the elementary school library, many people are quick to forget that it was this movie that pioneered the idea of the shambling ghoul in white. For being a classic of film and pop culture as a whole, this movie has become somewhat forgotten, being unable to compare to the visceral and disturbing approach horror movies would take in the coming decades. But how would something so significant disappear into relative obscurity? And what does this movie bring to the table that makes it a classic? In this review, we're awakening an ancient power of the Hollywood Golden Age in order to see what we can learn from it.
Just as a warning to those of you who haven't seen this movie yet, there are major spoilers ahead. If you wish to see this movie for yourself, without having anything spoiled for you, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it.
The story begins in 1921 with Joseph Wemble, an archaeologist, conducting studies at a dig site in Egypt. Him and his understudy had recently unearthed the burial site of a mummy by the name of Imhotep, who had apparently been buried alive. A box was buried with him, one that Joseph's friend Dr. Muller, an expert on the rituals of ancient Egypt, urges him not to open. While the two men are discussing the matter, though, the understudy opens the box, discovering a scroll inside. As the understudy transcribes the scroll, he utters the words to himself, and in doing so, awakens the undead Imhotep. Imhotep takes the scroll and flees, leaving the understudy shocked at the sight of him. Joseph Wembles returns to find the understudy laughing hysterically, simply saying, "He got up and went for a stroll." 11 years later, Dr. Muller has returned to Egypt with Joseph's young son, Frank. The two men are seen packing up their dig site as they have found nothing, but as they do, a mysterious man by the name Ardith appears to them, offering them the location of a tomb on a piece of stone inscribed with hieroglyphs. The dig team find the tomb, revealed to be that of Princess Ankhesenamun. At the Cairo Museum hosting the discoveries, Ardith appears and begins to read passages off a scroll, as well as the name of Ankhesenamun. While doing this, a young woman named Helen falls into a trance, leaving the party she had been attending and desperately attempting to get into the museum. Joseph and Frank are there to witness her as she promptly faints. The two men bring her back to their home, and while she recovers, Joseph discusses with Dr. Muller how he heard her mutter the name Imhotep while in her trance. They receive a call that one of the night watchmen at the museum has been murdered, and a scroll has been found with his body. After returning from the museum, Joseph, Frank, and Dr. Muller discuss the events that have transpired, speculating as to how they may have happened. While they are doing this, Ardith appears in their home, quickly becoming fascinated with Helen. Frank quickly spirits Helen away, and at this point Ardith is revealed to be Imhotep. He attempts to hypnotize Joseph into giving him the scroll he had left at the museum, but Dr. Muller intervenes, sending Imhotep away after threatening to burn the scroll. Once Imhotep is gone, Dr. Muller convinces Joseph to burn the scroll for real. Imhotep watches from a view through a magically infused pool as Joseph attempts to burn the scroll, but he uses his magic to reach through the portal and stop Joseph's heart before he can burn the scroll. Imhotep then uses a servant to retrieve the scroll from the home before Joseph's body is discovered. Imhotep then uses his magic to hypnotize Helen into coming to his abode, where he reveals to her the truth about who he is. We learn Imhotep was a priest who fell in love with the pharaoh's daughter, Ankhsenamun. When she died, he invoked the wrath of the gods by attempting to steal the scroll that would see her brought back to life. For his crime, he was buried alive, left alone in the ground for 3,700 years. After Helen returns to the hotel she was staying at, she is kept under watch of Frank, Dr. Muller, and several caretakers. But Imhotep puts a curse on Frank, which nearly kills him. Helen, now possessed by the spirit of Ankhsenamun, leaves the hotel and meets Imhotep at the museum. It is there that Imhotep reveals that in order for Ankhsenamun to live again, he must kill the body of Helen, allowing Ankhsenamun to return in the same immortal form as Imhotep. As Dr. Muller and Frank arrive, interrupting the ritual, Ankhsenamun cries out to the gods, asking for their forgiveness and for the power necessary to stop Imhotep. The gods strike out, reducing Imhotep to skeletal remains while burning the scroll to ash. In the final moments of the movie, Frank cradles the lifeless form of Helen in his arms, but with the urging of Dr. Muller, is able to bring her back from the brink of the afterlife with his love for her. So to be fair, this movie was made in the early 1930s, and as a result, a lot of the techniques they used to make the movie are dated. But with that said, it doesn't really help that no matter how you look at it, and there's really no way of sugarcoating it, this movie's kind of boring. I don't think I need to tell you why that's a problem, especially when you're talking about what is supposedly a horror movie. There is one positive worth talking about with this movie, and that is the flashback scene. The set design there does a good job of giving you a sense of setting for ancient Egypt, and in the scene where Imhotep is being wrapped in bandages before being sealed in the sarcophagus, Boris Karloff delivers a pretty good performance, helping to tap into that fear of being buried alive. His voiceover for that scene also helps to deliver that extra bit of atmosphere and emotion for how much he suffered for trying to save his lover. Other little things that were fairly well done were the visuals and the lighting. The water pool mirror, the scene of Imhotep withering into a skeleton, and the lighting placed over Imhotep's eyes to show his power of hypnosis are all pretty crafty visual tricks considering the limited technology for the time. And there are some scenes where subtle lighting changes showing the arrival and passage of Imhotep's influence give a nice boost to the scenes where they show up. Unfortunately, these things aren't enough to stop the movie from being a bit of a drag, even with its relatively short runtime. The pacing of this movie is super clunky, due in part because every scene seems to stop as soon as it feels like you're getting somewhere, and the cut to black that accompanies it makes this feel less like one cohesive story and more like 47 separate events that just happen to work together as a movie. This may be attributed to the limitations of camera and editing technology at the time, and potentially because earlier movies were carried out more like stage plays than the sweeping, cohesive narratives we're used to, but it does make it hard to watch when every single scene comes with a hard stop. Speaking of technology limitations, there are a couple of instances in the movie where they use still frames to fill the gaps between scenes. Most notably the close-up shot of Boris Karloff's face that they used to demonstrate his abilities with hypnosis. Though it is admittedly a good picture, and has become something of an iconic shot, it is incredibly distracting because it shows up 4 or 5 times and brings the movie grinding to a halt when it does. Because of the existing pacing issues, this ends up being more of a detriment than a service to the film, even if it is a picture of Imhotep's good side. While the story is an interesting one, it's in such a rush to push you to the final ceremony that it kind of forgets to give you a worthwhile reason to be invested in what's happening. Sure, we get a spooky origin story, sure we get a narrative about star-crossed lovers, and sure we get people explaining Egyptology and the ancient magical arts with all of the detailed enthusiasm of a 4-day session of D&D world building, but no one of these things do anything to bring you into the story, and perhaps more importantly, spook you. Granted, this may have been a fright for some folks back when this film was released, but I'm also pretty positive that most people alive around that time were more liable to be scared of other things. With the exception of Boris Karloff, the acting is pretty schlocky, and not in a cheesy B-movie kind of way. It honestly feels like everyone is half-bakedly stumbling towards the finish line of the movie without ever really being attached to their character in a way that convinces viewers they should actually care what's going on with them. Even Big Boy Boris is guilty of sleepwalking through some of his scenes. This isn't helped by the fact that the dialogue is super clunky and on the nose to begin with. It's all well and good that they're trying to explain what's going on and why, in a detail-oriented fashion. But if you remember, the golden rule of storytelling is show, don't tell. The last point is more a point of uninformed pop cultural confusion, but we only get a couple minutes at the start of the movie where Imhotep is all wrapped up in his gauzy garb. Within 2 minutes of waking up, he just leaves and then spends the rest of the movie in normal clothing. Which leaves me to wonder if this is actually the movie that spawned the whole idea of the shambling bandage-wrapped husk. Was there some other factor that popularized that visage, because this movie doesn't really have any of that? Who knows? Maybe that's another review for another day. The final rating for The Ghoul That Could Do With Some Vino is 5 out of 10. Much like the entombed pharaohs this movie is inspired by, this film is more effective as a time capsule, both for 1920s archaeology in Egypt and classic filmmaking, as opposed to being a proper story. Though an interesting and impactful footnote in horror history, its dated structure and anemic performances and story have doomed it to be just that. But hey, at least it's not the Tom Cruise version, right?
And that will be it for today. Thank you all for stopping by. If for whatever reason you enjoyed what you saw today, consider sticking around, maybe leaving a like or subscribing if you wish. And if you have any recommendations for movies you want to see reviewed in the future, be sure to drop those down in the comments. There's plenty more to come, so if that's something you care about, I'll see you when I see you.